Hey everyone, it's Eric Skeeter again, Skeeter Advisors. Looking forward to another show with you today entitled Empathy is Anger's Kryptonite. We're going to talk today about how we can provide a positive outcome, a positive response to a customer who is angry or upset about any number of matters. So today we're going to talk about empathy. We're going to talk about kryptonite. So let's get the definitions out of the way first. Okay. So the first thing is we're going to talk about the um, definition of empathy. According to Oxford, empathy is the ability to understand and to share the feelings of another. And kryptonite, according to Merriam Webster, I guess Oxford didn't want to touch this one, is a substance that causes the comic book character Superman to become weak and when he is exposed to it. So now that we've got those definitions out of the way, let's talk about what empathy is. And empathy is kryptonite to anger. All right, let's talk about why that's happening. So we can serve our customers better when we put ourselves in their shoes, when we understand where they're coming from. That's what empathy is to me. It's when we truly feel what they're feeling. And you can do that when you're listening to a customer and you see their body language and you hear the inflection in their voice and just the very topic that they're discussing. That is something that as a leader, as a manager, as a customer service provider, we learn to read when we're helping customers. How many of you have read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? In that, habit number 5 is seek first to understand, then to be understood. To me, that is the key ingredient. That is empathy. Seeking to understand, putting ourselves in their shoes. So tell me about, do you recall a time, can you remember a time when someone showed you empathy or when you showed empathy to another and how much more efficient and how much more pleasant the situation was? I can think of a lot of times when that's happened. But to give you guys kind of a feel for it, a feel to help you seek to understand, we're gonna go through a scenario. So first we're gonna talk about Mrs. Smith. So Mrs. Smith is a resident. She's come into the leasing office and we've welcomed her in and clearly she's upset. Something happened and she's mad. She comes in and Mrs. Smith, how can I help you? Well, I'm really upset because I pay my rent on time. I've never paid late before, and I got a phone call and I got an email today from your office that said I owe you a late fee and I need to pay my rent today because it's late. Well, I don't pay late and I'm really upset about this. Well, body language, voice inflection, everything tells you, whew, this is a hot potato. And you've got to make sure that not only do you help her solve the problem, but you've got to do it in a manner that preserves the service level that you've been providing to Mrs. Smith over this time so that you don't, ruin that streak that you have. So first of all, just to remind you, it's true. Mrs. Smith does pay her rent on time. This was a mistake made by the office. And it's really important when you're dealing with this kind of situation at this heightened level of emotion, it's really best to get the manager involved. So the manager will come in and say, Mrs. Smith, come on in my office. Let me talk to you. And the first thing that the manager should do is to sit down and say, Mrs. Smith, please, I see how upset you are. I overheard you talking to my lease consultant. Please explain to me everything so I can take some notes. that's going to be a nice first sign of you building trust and credibility with Mrs. Smith so that she knows that you're taking this seriously. So Mrs. Smith goes on, and she's going to go on, and sometimes they go on and on and on. And that's okay because everyone is different in the way they respond to different stimulus, to different circumstances and situations. And as a customer service person, we have to be kind of, you know, chameleons and change our stripes so that we make sure that we are handling our customer that needs us in the way that's best for our customer in front of us. So you're going to listen to Mrs. Smith. You're going to let her go on and talk. Don't interrupt her. Please don't interrupt. Let her give you the whole story. Once she's finished, then you're going to, the first thing, the most important thing is to apologize just in advance and say, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Smith, that this has happened to you and it's upset you so much. And then you're gonna reassure Mrs. Smith that you're in good hands. We're going to take care of this. And here's what we're going to do. But first, Mrs. Smith, before I tell you the next steps, I'd like to make sure that I heard you completely clearly. And this is the part where you are seeking to understand, to make sure that you understood her. So what you're going to do is you're going to repeat from your notes what you heard from Mrs. Smith. You're going to list the items that she said. You're going to ask her, Mrs. Smith, I just want to make sure, is that what I heard from you? Did I miss anything? Is there anything else that you wanted to add? If she does, listen, don't interrupt, and just rinse and repeat until you get everything from her. Again, builds trust, builds credibility, shows her that you are serious about taking care of her and that nothing else matters except for taking care of her question and her problem. The next thing you're going to do is after you've summarized everything, you're going to say, okay, now that I know exactly what happened and the concerns, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop here for a minute and I'm going to remind you guys, customers in our business in property management, they don't know our business the way we know our business. I liken it to when you go buy a car, right? When you go buy a car, you don't know what's going on in that back office when they're telling you, well, I need to go back and get approval from my manager. Or wouldn't it be nice if you really believed that when they tell you, here's how much the dealer paid for the car, and here's how much our profit's going to be, that you really believe them? Well, I can't say that I really believe them because unfortunately I haven't met, many people in that business that I can trust. Not to say that there are. I know there are hundreds out there. Same thing in our business, right? Mrs. Smith, unfortunately, because we are the landlord, we collect the rent. Sometimes there's a belief that, we only care about collecting the rent and we don't care about the customers. And so as a manager, as a customer service person in this business, you probably are better served if you just assume that that's might be what's on her mind. So let's go back to Mrs. Smith, and when we're explaining what we're going to do, you want to make sure that you pull back that curtain for transparency's sake, for trust's sake, to ensure that you keep that bond and that relationship where it needs to be with Mrs. Smith. And you let her know, Mrs. Smith, here's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into the system and I'm going to make your correction on your account. I'm going to make sure that it shows a zero balance right now, that there's no late fee charged. I'm going to wipe out that letter that was sent out to you so it's not in your record. And no one else is going to call you this month about your rent. And then I'm going to send you an email, Mrs. Smith, and I'm going to attach a copy of your ledger to show you and prove to you that balance is zero, along with my apologies. And, in the letter, in the body of the letter, it explains that you pay your rent on time. You do not owe rent today for this month. And that letter is going to get emailed to you today. Then you explain to her again, I apologize. I know this probably, Mrs. Smith, if this had happened to me, again, showing her that you understand her, empathy. Mrs. Smith, if this had happened to me, I would have been embarrassed. I would have been upset and angry. I really appreciate that you came in and you explained it to me, and I appreciate this one-on-one conversation. Thank you for coming in and trusting this with me. I'm going to make sure that I do this right by you, and I'm going to make sure that you're satisfied. So I'm going to stop here, Mrs. Smith, and ask you, is does that take care of all of your concerns? Is there anything else that I missed? Anything else that I can do to make you feel better and to try and move forward from this with you? And you listen to her. And if she has more things, you talk about those issues and you rinse and repeat until she's satisfied. And then you thank her very much for coming in. The meeting's over, but this whole process isn't over. The next thing you need to do, which is incredibly important, is follow up. Just like with leasing, sales, renewals, everything, follow up. 24 hours, I recommend. At a 24-hour period after you've sent the letter to Mrs. Smith, if you haven't heard anything from her, send her an email and call her. Say, Mrs. Smith, I just want to follow up and make sure that you didn't have any other questions. Did you receive my email? Please call me back or email me just so that I know for sure. That follow-up means everything to Mrs. Smith. Whether the problem was resolved or not, whether she's completely satisfied right now or not, it again shows her that you are serious about her needs, that you are important, that you had empathy, that you sought to understand her, and that you understood her. It's so key, guys, in customer service. So that's just a good, easy example of showing empathy. It helps to reduce the despair feel, the anger feel, the embarrassment when you're taking them seriously and you're listening to them. And you truly have to care in your heart that this is important. This isn't just a job, guys. This is truly important to you as a person. We're servant leaders, all of us. And we need to treat our customers, our coworkers, and everyone else in that way for this to really work. Now, I'm going to tell you, there are always exceptions to this process. Something could go awry. Sometimes you may have a customer that, for instance, sometimes there are customers who have had multiple problems with your office or with a service provider in your office. If that happens too many times, sometimes even this process becomes more difficult. It just means that you have to pour more into it. In leadership positions, that's what we have to do. We have to continue to be that chameleon and figure out what it is that we need to make sure that we solve the problem for our resident, for our customer, in the best way possible for that individual. So never assume how somebody feels. Never assume that I know how that person's probably feeling. Take it seriously, listen to them, ask questions so that you can get the real story so you know how they feel. Don't assume. So I guess I'll wrap things up and say, going forward, make sure that you use that kryptonite of empathy whenever you next encounter a customer in need. And by the way, this works with your coworkers, vendors, your leaders, and I recommend you use it in your personal life too. It works for me, same principles. Guys, thanks again for listening. I'll see you on the next show. Thanks for joining me today. You'll be seeing some guests on my next show. We're really excited about that. We just taped our first one this morning. Thanks again, Eric Skeeter, Skeeter Advisors. Give us a call with any of your needs. Chat in the chat below. We look forward to seeing you next time. See ya.